Hey everybody, welcome back to Freedom Malts. I'm Jerm, coming at you with another First Impression Friday. This one's a little bit different. We're looking at a bourbon. What? Twisted Path out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I said this before, I love craft distilleries. I love small distilleries, family-owned distilleries. They're just fantastic. A couple reasons. They can change things up on a moment's notice. They want to play with a different yeast strain today, they can play with a different yeast strain today. They want to change the temperature of fermentation, they can change the temperature of fermentation. They can do that whenever they want, at any given time. Twisted Path has not released, so this is technically their second bourbon release. The first one was done in 375s. It was a single barrel. It happened actually on Black Friday of 2021. This one just happened earlier this month, May 12th. And the label does say batch number 1. Technically, it's batch number 2. And for them, a batch is a barrel. They distill about 1 barrel at a time, let it age, put it out. This particular one, they did change it up just a little bit because they can. This bottling is 4 barrels worth of bourbon, 68% corn, 32% rye. That's the mash bill. The corn part of the mash bill is made up of sweet yellow and blue hoppy, or hoppy, or however you say it. They are grain to glass. They do everything themselves in-house at their place that they built in 2013. Really neat. I'm just going to read this little excerpt off the bottle because I love this statement. Our path. Life is too short to follow someone else's path. We believe in following your passion. We built a small distillery in Milwaukee where we make organic spirits from scratch. In life and in making our spirits, we're sometimes traditional and we're sometimes innovative. We follow our own path. We hope you enjoy the results. Perfect. I love that. I think that's great. But anyways, about the whiskey. We already covered what it's made out of. It is distilled or aged at least 5 years. 2 of the barrels were just over 6. 2 of the barrels were just under 6. So technically it has to be a 5-year stated. Proof on it, 112. Yeah, 56%, 112 proof. Out of the barrels, it came in at about in the high 130s. They slowly brought it down to 112 where they thought it tastes great. So, let's get into it. Okay, so on the nose, yeah, pretty classic bourbon. You got the caramels, you got the vanillas, you got little, there's an herbalness to it. A little bit of orange peel, pretty classic bourbon notes. The citrus is coming up more and more. Herbal's fading down just a little bit as it's opening up a little bit more. I know I'm not the biggest fan of bourbon in the world. You're not going to hear me going goo-goo over bourbon. However, I do like bourbon. Bourbon does taste good. I have a tendency to prefer smaller distilleries, not the big boys. Definitely not the allocated overhyped stuff. Not my jam. I would rather support somebody that's doing something unique than somebody that's making their bottles impossible to get. A little bit of alcohol on it. I mean, 56, not the craziest, highest thing I've ever had, but, you know, it's respectable. It's pretty high. I'm not pulling a lot else out. I get the citrus, the orange peel, a little bit of herbal still, maybe like a clove type herbalness. Obviously, caramels, vanillas, definitely there and present. Little dry dustiness, but overall, pretty classic bourbon on the nose. Let's give it a taste. very dusty, very dried grass, dry hay, a little vanilla undertone. Okay, so basically what I've said, that's what I'm getting. Very dusty, very dry hay, dry grass. I am picking up a little bit of herbalness, and I'm assuming because the rye content is fairly high for a bourbon. It's at 32% of the mash bill is rye. I mean, that's great. Nice sweetness, and it's a different sweetness. It's not a typical bourbon sweetness, but it's definitely a bourbon sweetness. The vanilla undertone is there, the caramel, the toffee. Good amount of barrel tannin, and in fact, even just a little bit of char in there as well. Delicious. It's actually a very good bourbon. If I'm leaning towards any bourbon one way or the other, this is the dusty, dry hay, dry grass kind of thing is not typically my flavor preference. But that herbalness really comes out and says hello. And it makes it a little bit more unique and maybe a little bit more enjoyable. Let's add a little bit of water to it and see what it does. If you're ever visiting Milwaukee, I definitely recommend giving them a visit. Apparently they have a great tasting room. They make some really unique spirits, and their rye, which I did have the opportunity to try this past weekend, was really good. They typically do have their rye available, and it is a bottled and bond rye too. So that's kind of cool because Wisconsin doesn't have much for bottled and bond rye, if any at all, other than them. So that's kind of a cool thing. All right, so water tamped down the dustiness a little bit. Really, in all, it smells about the same, except like that level of dustiness came down a bit. Okay, so also on the nose, before I forget this, that orange peel citrus kind of went away with the water. However, on the palate, immediately way sweeter. The citrus and the orange came back on the palate quite a bit more than what it was prior to the water, and the finish is shortened up a little bit, and it's not quite as tanniny, bitey, and the char is kind of gone. But yeah, with the addition of water, definitely a little bit closer to where I'm leaning towards my bourbon preference. Overall, first impression, quality bourbon, nice bit of age on it, 5 years. That's pretty good for a small craft distillery to let their stuff go for 5-6 years. Price was a little bit high on this one. Kind of one of the downsides of small craft distilleries. Their prices are sometimes a bit higher, but overall, I would say definitely a good expression or good example of a bourbon. Great company, great attitude. I love their little slogan there about their path. If you're ever in Milwaukee, check them out. I think it'd be a good fun time, and I know they make rye whiskey that's fantastic. Their bourbon whiskey seems like it's looking pretty good so far, and they do have some other spirits as well. So thanks everybody, and cheers to this American spirit.